Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the F.W. Robinson Reading Room in Fryer Library. We're delighted to host you for the third event in our Connected Conversation series. Today's event is Imagining Inclusive AI at UQ, Disability, Access, and Design. My name's Jeff Cruz, and I'm the University Librarian at UQ, and I'm pleased to be your MC for today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet here at UQ's beautiful St. Lucia campus. On behalf of UQ Library, I pay my respects to ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, noting that this has been a place of teaching, learning, and discussion for many thousands of years. As we're meeting in the Fryer Library, I also want to acknowledge that UQ Library is custodian of culturally sensitive Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander materials. I'd also like to express my firm and proactive commitment to supporting efforts for greater diversity and inclusion within the library and more broadly at UQ. Diverse perspectives, abilities, experiences, and backgrounds inspire creativity, encourage innovation, and broaden our understanding and enrich our communities. I'd like to welcome everyone here with us today, whether you're joining us in person, thanks for coming along, or if you're joining us online. We value the unique perspectives and lived experience that each of you brings. We recognize that people engage in different ways, and we encourage you to participate in whatever manner works best for you. Please feel free to be your authentic selves. You're welcome to move around, use fidget tools, take a break, or use other strategies that support your participation. If there's anything we can do to make your experience more comfortable, please let one of the library staff know. So thank you very much for being here. Today's event has been developed in collaboration with the team behind UQ's Digital Inclusive Design Project, which is exploring how people experience UQ's digital environment and how accessibility and inclusion can be strengthened across our digital services. Many of the themes we'll be discussing this afternoon, including participation, access, and inclusive design, are closely connected to this work. If today's discussion sparks ideas or reflections about your own experiences, the Digital Inclusive Design team would welcome the opportunity to hear from you. And on the slide, there is an email address if you'd like to contact them. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers. Brooke Such is a PhD candidate in the School of Business, a passionate advocate for disability inclusion. Her research explores ways to remove barriers for neurodivergent students seeking to engage in global learning opportunities. She is committed to understanding the lived experiences of individuals in academia and in the workplace. In addition to her PhD studies, Brooke is a senior project officer in HR Workplace Diversity and Inclusion and leads the Disability Inclusion Advocacy Network, known as DIAN, at UQ. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you.
Dr. Charlotte Young is a strategic lead Inclusive Teaching and Learning at the University of Queensland Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation, or as we call IDLI. She leads the newly established Inclusive Learning Design team, which works to embed inclusive practice across the university through curriculum design, assessment, accessibility, and staff capability. The team's work focuses on reducing barriers to learning and supporting equitable student success through evidence-informed practice. Charlotte also contributes to research exploring how students with disabilities engage with generative AI and what these insights can tell us about designing more inclusive learning environments. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you. I like the reveal on that.
Professor Paul Harper, OAM, is an internationally recognized scholar in disability rights, inclusive education, and higher education reform at the T.C. Byrne School of Law. As director of the UQ Disability Collaboratory, a university-wide initiative, he works to drive real-world change through research, policy, and practice. A lawyer, award-winning researcher, and former Paralympian, Paul brings both lived experience and academic expertise to his work. In 2024, he was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for his service to people with disability. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, mate.
Associate Professor Bernadette Richards is the Director of Higher Degree Research and the Associate Professor of Ethics, Professionalism, and Scholarship at the University of Queensland Medical School. Earlier this year, she was appointed as co-editor-in-chief of the Medical Law Review. An active researcher, Bernadette has completed major projects on organ donation, consent to treatment, and legal issues around innovative surgery. She is a chief investigator on 4 current major grants, including the National Health and Medical Research Council IDEAS Grant, titled "The Algorithm Will See You Now: Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications of Adopting Machine Learning Systems for Diagnosis and Screening." Her book, Technology, Healthcare and the Law, An Evolving Relationship, was published in 2022. Welcome, Bernadette.
Thank you.
So please join me in welcoming all of our presenters. All right, so what we'll do today, we will consider what inclusive AI means for learning, teaching, and research. We'll begin with a student perspective before exploring the opportunities and challenges that AI presents for inclusion and accessibility in teaching and in research. Finally, we'll consider the broader ethical considerations that arise as these emerging technologies become increasingly embedded across the higher education sector. Following the presentations, we will have a short break before moving into a panel discussion and Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Brooke.
Thank you so much for that. Everyone, before I start, I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet today, and I really encourage all of you here to take the time to look at Indigenous models of disability, reciprocity, and being a community, because there's a lot we can learn from there. And I'm actually a bit ashamed of myself I didn't look at any AI scholars from Australian or other First Nations communities, because I think it's worth our time investigating what they're doing in that space. Yes, so today I'm just going to be very casual and informal because that's who I am as a person and I don't have another version of me for you, and which feels hard to do in this very formal environment. So thank you again for finding us in this difficult part of the library. So I'm going to talk a bit about the student perspective, and I just want to make this disclaimer that I'm going to be talking about just the general conversations and the general views. They're not necessarily my views, and I'll pop in there when it's my view. But I just wanted us to all get on the same page. So the really big thing is that I think we all know for students, AI is everywhere. Everyone is using it except a small pocket of really strong people who are really morally against AI, and that's typically around the environment and privacy. And again, you might not know that, but that is a very strong part of the conversation that students are having here at UQ, especially those who refuse to use AI in any way. Especially with that environmental impact and the concern around data centers taking up a lot of resources. When we're having those conversations in student spaces here in UQ around disability or on a lot of online spaces, so if I'm in some of the disability community spaces wider where students are, there's a lot of controversy about the use of AI even as a disability support. And there's very much 2 camps there. You've got one side who's like, this is amazing for disabilities, these are amazing, these can make the accommodations, we don't have to individually do it, or we don't need to rely on the humans around us to do it. And then you've got the other camp who they kind of say that relying on AI for disabilities is actually quite ableist, and people with disabilities were quite capable beforehand, of things like not to lean into the inspiration porn thing, but it's like, well, do you really need ChatGPT to make your art piece when you've got people who literally are doing it with their feet and things beforehand? And that's not me making a decision there, but I thought that was a really interesting part of the conversation that I don't see a lot, especially that balancing of concerns with the supports. And I'm not going to put my opinion in there. I just wanted to kind of report the conversations happening in that space and something for us to be aware about. Because a bit later, I'm going to touch a bit more on those kind of ethical concerns that the students have and how, the role, especially of universities, to actually address that. But I just wanted to put that out there. But again, students aren't even necessarily just using that for work. A lot of that is to do with the social aspects of universities. I spend a lot of time in neurodivergent spaces, and it's really classic to... So one of my core uses of AI, I don't use a lot of AI, but one of my core uses of AI is, can you make this email a bit nicer? Yesterday, I was writing an email response, nothing work related to an outside organization, and my roommate just heard me go, and she said to me, like, I hope you run that through AI before you send it. And I did. Again, a lot of those conversations aren't even just about the classroom. For a lot of us, it is how do we manage our time? How do we balance things? How do we communicate? How do we exist in the wider university structure? Does that all make sense to everyone? So again, a lot of you probably already know a fair bit of that, but I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. So when we go to the next area, so I think I'm going to talk a bit more broadly about students and then get back into students with disabilities specifically. But one of the biggest recurring themes that comes up around AI is that students are really frustrated by the knowledge gap, in the sense of we as students are learning about it at the same time as our teaching staff, if not before, as our admin staff, as universities and so on. And I think it keeps, especially when students are looking for guidance around ethics, that's a really big point of frustration. And one of my peers, Ben Roden-Cohen, he did a LinkedIn post that captured it really well. I'm going to give a little quotey quote. He made this post that said, throughout my studies so far, I've used AI very sparingly. This is because I've been told mostly about how not to use it. I value and enjoy the process of thinking critically about my coursework, and I currently don't know of any strategies for AI use which enhance that. I don't know of an AI which is tailored for use at university, and as a student, there's no way I could afford a paid version of well-known models, and I'm deeply concerned by AI's environmental risk in order to mitigate access pollution. I want my AI use to be as specific and effective as possible. And that's Ben Roden-Cohen again, very good student advocate in the space. I thought I wanted to quote that post because I think that sums up how a lot of students are feeling about it. And that when I read that, I see students looking for guidance, and the rest of his post is essentially saying, can anyone tell me how to use, not how not to use, or what the pitfalls and things are? So I really wanted to play into that. And I think a lot of those points he brings up are doubly true for students with disabilities, because there's so much gray area. A lot of policies will say no AI use, flat. And then students who are dyslexic go, well, can I use a spell checker? And things like that. When it's a blanket no AI policy, but do we even consider a spell checker AI under these things? The guidance really isn't there, and that's really frustrating and very stressful for a lot of our students, because again, they might choose to use it and then be really concerned about potential consequences there. Even with these concerns, disabled students really are experimenting with AI in lots of different ways. And I was actually so confident that Jason would be, hi Jason, Jason would be on this panel. I literally have a dot point here, which is like, Jason will tell you more about this. But for anyone who doesn't know Jason, Jason's the accessibility guy from the library. Sup, Jason, shout out. I never saw his name on the schedule, I just assumed. But students are working with a really wide set of things, and especially with how varied disabilities are, there's not necessarily a lot of overlap in what we're using, but a lot of the conversations in the disabled student spaces that I'm hearing are really focused on tools that help with executive functioning and processing. So when I'm talking about executive functioning, to oversimplify it, how do you actually manage your time? How do you balance tasks? How do you organize tasks? Even how do you break down tasks? And that's often associated with neurodivergence, but especially for a lot of those with chronic illnesses where you're often taken out for a lot of the time, or you might have a sudden flare-up and you can't finish things with the same amount of time that you expected. What I hear a lot is, I need to maximize my time that I do have. So a lot of tools around executive functioning that, again, aren't necessarily writing are being used. Goblin Tools keeps coming up. It's Goblin Tools Free AI. One of the main things it offers is if you've got a big task and it feels so overwhelming, it uses an AI to break down that task into more manageable step-by-step pieces. Again, it's very simple and maybe not what a lot of people are thinking about when we're talking about AI at universities, but that Goblin Tools comes up all the time as something that students are using to support their studies. particularly if they're postgraduate and so on, and they have a lot less structure within the actual degree. Another one I hear about a lot from a wide variety of disabilities, again, is the text-to-voice. And I'd be very interested to see if that's coming up for Jason. There's a specific one, and I forgot the name of it before coming here, but it uses AI to use celebrity voices that have agreed to be part of the program, and you can get like Snoop Dogg to read out your text. And I know, again, people with also, people who have any kind of vision thing, any kind of computer use barriers, a lot of ADHDers who are doing their dishes with like their headphones. Yeah. And they're just having Snoop Dogg read out their anthropology reading to them. And again, they're just things where what I'm hearing from that is people just need things in different formats, and AI can do that quickly, cheaply, and in the way that suits them. Because like, I don't know if I'd pick the Snoop Dogg voice, but if that's what's really gonna stick, it's what's gonna stick. But those are the two big things, because with all disabilities, there's so many specific ones. But again, executive functioning in that way that you actually have information processing sorted for you. I really want to try Focus Bear as an executive functioning one, because it hijacks your computer and it tells you, do you really need to open that new tab? And you go, yeah, of course. Or no, Focus Bear, I'll go back to the main task. But with all that said, those are the only ones I can really tell you that students are using a decent amount. And we are really, really looking for, a library or a recommendation of AI tools that are deemed ethical, that are deemed as like safe for us to use, that we know we can use them and we won't end up on like a probation type board or on a misconduct committee. Again, with disabilities, it's so broad, so it can be hard, but they really want things that have been vetted. We really want things, again, that we know we can just go to the UQ website, download it, and we know it might not work for us specifically, but we know if we use it, we're not in trouble, that we're being ethical, that we're doing things to the best of our abilities. And that's something that's really missing just on a global level. I think especially because AI is so hard to police at the moment. I really, really want to underline that. Students with disabilities, we really want to do the right thing, but we really need help to navigate that space, and that does include guidance and tested AIs, ethical AIs, and again, AIs that we know we can safely use. I'm going to keep saying that because that's a really big part. I think especially with the student access plans, the way they are, you've got months to wait for a student access plan. That itself doesn't guarantee the supports you need. A lot of people don't necessarily know what supports they need. You might be really new to the disability space. You might not know you can ask for certain things. You might go, well, I've got ADHD, I should get the Snoop Dogg voice, when the actual best way for you to learn is to, watch videos of people drawing it on the board or something. I think there's a really big space for AI to fill a lot of that gap. And recently in the conversation, we were shown that 27% of Australian school children are accessing disability supports. And my opinion on that is if there's a road with 27% of cars have crashed on that road, you fix the road, you don't modify the cars, right? But that might take longer than we hope. So if we're gonna have 27% of students coming in who need specific disability supports, we need to, get better at that. And I think we need to look at dedicated ethical AIs to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's what registers start. Yeah?
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. We have a lot of overlaps in our topic, so that's going to work out well. I also didn't know that I could just sit, so I have slides, and I'm going to stand up here at the lectern. I didn't realise I was allowed to do that. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to everyone in the room and those people joining us online. I too would like to thank the traditional owners and also the library and my fellow panellists for allowing me to be here today. So thank you very much. So as the introduction said, my name is Charlotte Young and I lead the Inclusive Learning Design team. which is a newly formed team and a team I'm really proud and excited has formed, because as a student who moved from a rural area to come to university, having and helping to create equitable experiences at UQ is something that's really strong in my heart as well. And now we have a whole team that helps focus on this, so it's really, really lovely. Our aim as a team, as was mentioned in the introduction, is to help further embed inclusive teaching and learning practice across UQ, with the aim of really trying to make sure that inclusive teaching practice is standard teaching practice. So what we really want to do is designed with sort of that broad diversity of the student population in mind from the outset, rather than sort of tacking inclusive practice in at the end. So to use Brooke's analogy, we want to fix the road and make sure the crashes don't happen, rather than just picking up people at the end. That went really dark at the end there, sorry. I didn't think the whole metaphor through though. That was pretty bad. So what this means is this really requires us to have an understanding of the student experiences and the barriers that they are facing, and those sort of recurring patterns of friction, so that we can intentionally design them out in the first instance, so that we're not just sort of waiting for them to happen. And so today I would like to focus specifically on students with disability, because that was the focus for today, which is one of the groups and one of many groups that we focus on as part of our team, and really shine a light on their experiences and some of the barriers that they're facing. And I'm going to use sort of two areas of lenses or focuses that I've had the really good fortune to be a part of. And I really hope that they are just two angles that we can take to look at these experiences. They're not the only angles, but they're two of them. So the first one I'd like to look at is, and Brooke mentioned this as well, student access plans and adjustments. So what are some of the things, that, lessons and things that we can learn from looking at student adjustment plans? And then the second one is a data that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in, which looks at UQ students with disabilities' use of Gen AI in their studies. And this is going to be so good because it reinforces a lot of the points that you just made, so that's excellent. I was thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, thank gosh, we're similar, so we're on the right track. And so in sharing these two lenses, what I'm really hoping to illustrate is that if we can look at barriers and look at sort of common areas and experiences, we can take some learnings from that and hopefully, again, design with intention to try and stop the roadblock, basically. I'm going to try and lean into that as we go. Might be a bit dark, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so the first lens I'd like to look through is student access plans and adjustments. So our team is now working with the student advisors in the student support and wellbeing services. So Swiss, we're Italy, they're Swiss. We like our European countries in Building 17. And what we're really doing is those student advisors meets with heaps and heaps of students to create their student access plans. And when they look at all the common things that students are requesting across all their different types of adjustments, we start to see a lot of recurring practices. We start to see that students are encountering the same sort of experiences in their learning that require adjustments around. And so we started to look at theming those, and we sort of come up with 4 broad themes for those students' adjustments. The first one is understanding and communication. So students are asking for clear language, written step-by-step guidance on how to do things. Processing time, and that's both written processing time, but also just processing time in the class. So when they get asked a question, they want some processing time to think about that before they respond. Materials. Students are asking for early access to materials. They're asking for transcripts and accessible formats, as Brooke mentioned before. They're looking for learning and assessment, so extensions, alternative modes for particular types of assessments, but also potentially alternative modes for how particular content is delivered. Additional time, and so that's again assessment, but also that thinking time in class and for class activities, and some aspects around group work. And then we also have some elements around wellbeing and environment. So looking at having breaks incorporated into lectures, note-taking, having the right furniture, so ergonomic furniture, the right lighting, placement locations, that's specifically for courses that have placements. And so these are some of the broad things that are coming up from student adjustment plans. Now, that doesn't mean that managing adjustments when we have adjustments, we'll always still need individual adjustments. We're not going to be able to get away with them completely because there's always unique cases that are going to need these. But if we start to see recurring patterns appear, then it starts to seem to be somewhat of a design issue that we can start to take steps to design out. So I want you to keep these sort of broad themes in your mind, and I'm going to move to the second lens, which is looking at UQ students with disabilities' use of Gen AI in their studies. And so when Gen AI first sort of came onto the scene, there was all this, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to solve all the problems. But nobody at that point had initially asked students with disabilities, do you actually want to use Gen AI? How do you feel about Gen AI? And so some colleagues of mine, we actually examined this, and we used the AI in Higher Education survey from 2024, which within it had 606 UQ students who identified as having a disability, health or mental health condition, or as neurodivergent. And it looked at how these students who identified as having a disability use Gen AI, okay? And so we actually delved into that. We actually found quite nuanced response even if in students using it or not. So as Brooke said, we had about 30% of students who said they never use Gen AI at all in their studies, which was much higher than those students who don't identified as not having a disability. But we did find that sort of 30% do use Gen AI in their studies sort of daily or weekly. So we're going to dive into those ones. And so the key themes that came up for why students would use it and their motivations for using it were these. So understanding and learning. So learning how to do something, summarizing notes, reading and generating ideas and examples. Communication and expression, so editing and improving their writing, improving English language skills. And I will mention that there was a lot of comments about improving the tone of emails, because a lot of students were worried less about being polite, but more about being professional. They were worried that their tone wasn't professional. And particularly for students who are neurodiverse, they were worried that they would come across the wrong way. So it was helping them with their communication. Managing study, as you said, so those functional impacts. So getting unstuck, making things faster and easier, reducing stress, and a lot of that was even that email communication stress, and building confidence. So having somebody that you can check your understanding with before potentially going and asking it what might be perceived as a silly question. So that kind of helping with managing study. And the last one was access. So finding information and researching, but also overcoming those accessibility challenges. So students are using AI to change the formats of various resources to be more accessible, okay, which is also something Brooke mentioned. Performance, you'll note, was not one of the key themes. It was one of the least reported motivators for why students use Gen AI in their studies, for exactly the reasons that Brooke alluded to. Students want to do the thinking for themselves, and they found that Gen AI potentially distracted from that. So performance was not a key motivator. We also found that students were really thoughtful about how they use Gen AI. Okay, so they had quite reasonable concerns around accuracy. So a lot of students were worried about getting the wrong information. They were worried about the ethics. They were worried about privacy. They were worried about their own capability and how to use it. So they're like, I don't know if I use it as well as the person next to me, and I need to learn how to do it better. And affordability. So they were like, some people have better tools than I do, so does that mean that they're going to perform better than I do? And things like that. So students are using AI, if they do choose to use it, very, very intentionally. And so again, this highlights some of the areas that students may need support for in their learning. That's not all the areas, but these are potentially some of the ways that students might need support in their learning. So if I look at these alongside the previous lens, which was adjustments, what sort of starts to come into focus? And I don't want to overstate the relationship here. These are two quite different sources of information, and I'm not suggesting there's a direct relationship between them, but there are a few areas and familiar patterns that start to emerge, okay? So the first one being clarity and processing. So in SAPS, we saw requests for clear instructions, information broken into steps, additional time processing, and in AI, we see students asking for explanation, summary, things to be broken down into step-by-step ways, structuring ideas, getting unstuck. Access, again, we're seeing students in SAPS asking for materials to be provided in accessible formats. And in their AI use, they're literally getting AI to make the resource accessible. So quite a clear overlap in that particular one. And then the last one, sort of managing learning. So again, in SAPS, we're getting things like extensions, additional time to think and process things. And in AI, we're getting students sort of saying, I need to save time, make up time, reduce stress, how to get started, how to make it feel more manageable. Okay, so again, these are not exact matches, but they are similar. And what interests me is that if you get different sources of student experiences and different lens, and start to see recurring patterns, we can start to think, how might we design more intentionally to address some of these aspects? And so this is 3 very brief ideas that if I was thinking, if I had those barriers, what might be 3 things that I could do to potentially address those? So for clarity and processing, I might start, how can I make my language a bit clearer? How can I potentially provide written and verbal instructions? Can I provide examples that might make things a bit easier? Can I give students more time to process things in my lectures after asking a question? For access, I can think about how can I make my materials more accessible in the first instance rather than making students adapt them later on. Can I use captions? Can I do transcripts? Can I use a microphone so that students can clearly hear me in a lecture room? Managing learning. So can I release my materials really early so students have the maximum amount of time to engage with them as possible? Can I be quite consistent in how I lay out my Blackboard site so students know where to go to access the readings and the literature and the resources? And even in my class discussions, can I be quite consistent so students know what the flow of the lecture is going to be so they don't have to unpack of what's coming next? These are 3 very basic things, and if you take nothing away, that's great. But the thing I actually really want you to take away is not so much these 3 things, but it's more that if noticing patterns and then considering whether there's something you could design out is really what I'm hoping you go away with today. So that's where I want to leave you. So I've used 2 lenses today to look into students' experiences with disabilities, but there are multiple lenses that you could apply. But I encourage you to look for patterns in what your students are doing, how they're interacting with resources. What are those things telling you? What are those common friction points that you see students encountering? And how can you potentially design them out in your practice and think intentionally from the outset? So we are the Inclusive Learning Design team. We're different from the digital Inclusive Learning Design team that you saw at the beginning. So we're in Italy. Our email is there. If you're interested in any of the research, the researchers are listed there as well. We do have a paper that's going to be coming out and analysing all of the very brief things that I ran through today. So keep an eye out for that as well. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I'll turn it over to Paul now.
G'day all. G'day. Big talk a bit louder for that. I'd like to recognise the traditional owners of the land, past, present and emerging. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk a bit on how AI, artificial intelligence, has impacted upon my research as an academic living with a disability. Now, if you can't see me on stage, I'm totally blind and I use a guide dog who is probably wandering off because I'm boring. I've been away for 2 weeks, so he's good. Yeah, he's good, sorry. He's being cute. One of us has to be anyway. So anyway, that means obviously I live with a disability. Now, like all people that live with a disability, we know the world is not designed for us. And it realistically, in a lot of cases, designs us out. Now, there are pockets of inclusion. UQ is doing pretty good. But I'm always mindful that a change in society will come with additional challenges. Thus, I'm always looking ahead, looking over the horizon on what's coming. This means I can spot potential problems early, address them, but it also means, we'll try to address them, but it also means I'm also spotting opportunities early because I'm looking over the horizon. By remaining agile and ready to pivot, I seem to have a bit of success in my career. And I think persons with disabilities broadly are often good leaders because they do act like this, always looking over the horizon. Now, AI is changing how we research. This is just another problem, another opportunity. Now, I've spent a bit of time understanding how this will impact upon my career. So not just as a person with a disability, but my career. So I've got a prediction. I'm predicting that the parts of legal scholarship that consist of primarily gathering, rely on papers and judgments, just analysing them will be devalued in 5 years. So not eliminated. It's not going to be where academics create real value. So if you look at the traditional legal paper, which I've published a lot of and but you might read 200 sources, summarise them, what those sources say, organise them into themes, now explain the doctrinal developments, and then draw some moderate conclusions. So you don't want to say the world's going to change because of this, which I used to do, but you say something modest. Well, AI is really good at some of those steps, and it's even getting good at that last step. Now, I've just submitted a book to a publisher, and I wonder when I'm hitting send and when I'll get the edits back, are books like this going to be used anymore in the future? So what's the point of law academia? What's going to be a point where, what's my job going to be in 5 years? Despite all the grey hair, I'm not that old. I still want a career. So the areas of research I see really moving forward is where those that use AI to get started, but then do things AI at the moment doesn't do. For example, connecting data with lived realities. So AI can talk to you when you ring up insurance agencies, but it's not a human conducting an interview. It can't be in the real world. It can, it can observe you, or it probably observes us all the time, but it's not really performing an observational interview, observational research. It definitely can't perform a workshop like this, where people get together in the room and where research and ideas can thrive. So a study, for example, where a researcher is embedded in, I'll say disability, DPO, disability person organisation, and they're analysing how blind people may interact with AI. Now, we can do that as an academic, but AI doesn't do that. Another change is how research ecosystems are structured. Now, this is going to be a big change, I suspect. I think we're going to go from knowing the law, so knowing our discipline, we're the knowledge holders, to really focusing on what the impact is. So going in law would be going from the knowledge of law to the impact of justice. So we're going to go from having that knowledge, which a lot of us can get an AI, and there's a lot of, we can read about how we get to the cliff and how far from our actual knowledge can we get with AI before we start to look like buffoons. But it's going to be how we use the knowledge to have impact and to understand the need. Now, to understand the need for that impact and to understand whether we have an impact, all really does require human contact. It requires collaborations. And so the competitive advantage is probably, I think it will shift from publications to convening humans and how we use those humans to create real change. And that's so bringing the right people together to create change, to understand the hardest problems, is going to be important. And fortunately, I think the UQ Disability Collaboratory is going to be well positioned. It's not that any one person has knowledge, but the value will be how we bring those people together to create collaborations. So AI is going to help us think, but I don't think it can create a room full of people working together. And this is really important for disability. Co-design solutions is really important, not only because everyone wants to do it, but because AI often looks at what happened in the past. And I've got to say, the past really did suck for people with disabilities and still does in a lot of sense. If you think about it, I actually don't have to think about it. Most of the knowledge of that. It was really a short time ago when these huge barriers exist, and we've still got barriers today. Yeah, it's better, but you don't have to go past, who's that redheaded person? I shouldn't talk politics. But there's some of the idiots, people talking out there. There's a lot of stuff out there which is really harmful, and it's still said today. So a lot of the problems we have in society are designed in because people are excluded from design decisions. So the past is bad, present is getting better, but we want the future to be a lot better. Now, if the future is to be different, we need to have co-designed solutions. We need to have people with disabilities leading it. So things like the Disability Collaboratory is really important, and people with disability in decision making. And that's knowledge that can't emerge just from analysing documents. So in the pre-AI universe, value came from holding that knowledge. In the AI universe, the value is going to come from creating the conditions under which new knowledge, trusted relationships, lived experience, and real-world change can emerge. So that there's a bunch of structural impacts. Now I'm going to get I want to talk a bit about how I'm using it. Now, despite all these changes, despite ebooks, despite Marrakesh Treaty, now books are still closed. Now, for me, I'm blind, can't read a standard book. Now, they're hard to get still. AI, oh, it's so good. Tell me all the good books, and then most of the books are real. Most of them really do exist. You have to do a bit of checking, but I can, when I actually find it's a real book, I can go, can you summarize those books? And so I still like to get the real book and actually try and get a copy of it I can read, but it can enable me to narrow down what book I'm after much quicker. And so I can go out and get the original source or article, which I'm very happily I go out, and then I find sometimes it's still in a PDF or an image, or it has all those graphics which might help some people with disabilities and other people understand, which that doesn't work for me. And so when I get that, AI becomes helpful as well. So if you've got someone who insists on sending out complicated spreadsheets which just don't work, sometimes I could stick it into AI and ask it, hey, what's this say? What can you convert it for me? I'm totally blind. And that's normally accurate, but accuracy is an issue. Even if I go verify, 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 it doesn't always work. Now, for everyone, that's an issue. But if I'm relying on it as someone who can't see, how do I know it's right? So if I can't see the screen, I can't see if it's wrong. So that becomes more of an issue. So that's a bit of a pain. So it also is helped in formatting documents. So I can't see. I hate formatting documents. I'm not very good at it. Now I had a bright idea to put in my list of publications in a format. It's in the wrong format, in a mess. And I sent it in, and then it sent it back, and it was hopefully, it looked pretty good. I sent it to to someone who may be on this panel, and Brooke said, some of those references don't exist. I'm like, don't they? But I was really kind of like a bit miffed because I actually had the list and then I deleted the list. So I was in, so it actually it made up stuff, but I'd given it the stuff. So no, I'm being a bit more careful, but it's still helpful. Now, I'm just gonna, it does some things in the real world as well, not just the digital world. So meta glasses are used by a lot of people with disabilities to get around, enables you to get to places. AI, I use AI like GPS to get around a lot. I use the fancy stuff because I don't have time, and this is a problem. Even though like people can help you do some training, getting people who understand what people with disabilities want with the training, how to use it, and then the time to learn it, it's really time consuming. I can use AI to help me and give me instructions, and I do that all the time. But the time to keep up with the pace of change, it's really hard, and I'm always falling behind. So, and finally, I guess one thing I want to say is AI is going to take over the world. According to AI 2027, we're all going to get killed by AI. Now, that's really sad, but what really frustrates me is I'm still going to die on hold to the ITS department because my Outlook isn't working. I do not understand why we can have AI killing us, and I have to fill out a paper form in triplicate and get a sign-off from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about in the school. So it goes to someone else and then finally gets paid. It's just so mind-boggling. If we're going to have AI and kill us all, let's use it really efficiently and save us all time. Now, how do we use it? And it needs to be co-designed is really important. And fortunately, I'm on a project with Bernadette, and I'm going to flick to her because the bell rang more than a minute ago.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that, Paul. I've sort of been adjusting and readjusting what I'm going to say as we go along because people take some of my thoughts, and I'd like to start with pretty much where you almost finished, is that we need this thoughtful design. Humans have amazing designs, ideas. We've done some pretty cool stuff, but asbestos, aerosols, all these things that at some point was going to change our world has given a good shot at killing us. So, but we don't seem to have learnt too much because we still see that someone says the word innovation
and we go, cool, it's innovative, it's new. I fall foul of that. I always like to get the newest iPhone, the newest upgrade, the newest this, the newest that. And someone says, why are you doing that? Well, because it's new and it's innovative. Well, what's the difference between that and your old one? I don't know. But have you seen the colour? So we get caught up in this hype. So we need to learn. We need to learn from history, something that humans have not been particularly good at. AI is here to stay, but it's time, I think, that we actually we actually pause, we ask what's ethically appropriate, and we have ethical design. A lot of the work that I do, I talk about responsible governance, I talk about ethical design, and this is really what we've all been talking about here today. It's not just race forward and say AI is going to make our life easier. I'm so happy to hear that students aren't doing that, and we actually have bodies of students who are saying, well, no, it's actually trashing our environment. It might superficially make my life easier, but is it really making my life easier? One of the big challenges with AI, which Paul started to talk about, so I am going to give our project a little plug here, is that especially in the disability space, you have a whole lot of people who are solving a problem. Now, Paul, I can't create a solution for you as a blind person because I don't know what it is like to live as a blind person. But yet we have all of these, I'll call them the tech bros, and they're designing these solutions. But they certainly don't have that lived experience. They certainly haven't bothered to stop and have those conversations, or if they do, they might tag it co-design, but it's really just, we've had a nice little round table with a certain selection of people who are facing these challenges. But more often than not, they don't access the actual grassroots day-to-day people who are living. They may, now with all due respect, Paul, you are blind, but your experience as a blind person is vastly different to a lot of other people who are blind because you are very high functioning, you're an academic. You know, he said he's had some moderate success. I think you need to check your dictionary in the word moderate. But, you know, we need to talk to everybody, and we do need that co-design. The thing that, we can't just have AI's going to solve everything. We need to stop and think about what is it that we're trying to solve. And because also, as you're saying, the students aren't actually necessarily using it. So ethically, is it appropriate for us to design this and say, here you go, students, here's this package that's going to solve all of your challenges when we haven't even spoken with them? Now, please do reach out to us if anyone's interested in this, because we're actually trying to do some workshops to try and ask that question. But just more broadly, with respect to the ethical challenges, we've all danced around them. So I'd just like to sort of hone in on what a few of them are. Some of the key questions that we need to ask if we're talking about design is we need to ask who gets to decide what problems AI is going to actually solve. Mm-hmm. At the moment, it's the designers, and that's not ethical because it's someone saying, here's your problem, and we're going to fix it for you. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, as Paul said, he's still on hold to the IT department because the basic functionality of day-to-day life is not accessible, is not working. And then who benefits when it does succeed? You know, those who've done the designing might benefit financially. They might write lots of papers and they've got all of the marks of esteem, but the people that they've supposedly designed these for are still trying to find the on button because they haven't made it accessible. Who carries the risk when it doesn't? Well, it's those who are writing the papers, the interesting papers that talk about, oh, well, we tried this, but it didn't quite work. So they've got some more publications, but there's the people who are trying to use this so-called solution that is now unworkable and has potentially made their life harder. And the question then is, what power do us as the ordinary folk have in addressing those challenges that have arisen? As I said, technological advancements, we embrace it as an automatic good. But I think one of the big things we always have to ask is, just because we can do something, should we be doing it? And if we should be doing it, are we doing it in the right way? And we just need to pause and breathe before we race forward. I've always had a big challenge with the word innovation. I started looking at it in the context of innovative surgery, and now it's just sort of like innovative living. It's sort of bled out into that. We need to be really thoughtful in the way that we ask questions about AI and responsible AI. Here at the university, I see one of my core roles. I was for many, many years in another institution as a legal academic, and I'm now in the medical school doing very similar things with ethics and law. One of my core roles and one of my core duties is to encourage critical thinking. And one of the core ethical challenges with AI is that it is circumventing that critical thinking. So we need to work out in a university space how we're going to navigate that. And doing I saw a statement from, I think it was from Edinburgh School of Philosophy, it was in Scotland somewhere, and they've just said, no AI, we are philosophers and we will not use AI and we will not permit you to use AI. Well, in the immortal words of Castle, dreaming. You know, it's going to happen. You cannot just say no. You know, we all learnt from the age of past about the age of 3 that we can't just shut our eyes and put our fingers in our ears and say, la, 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 it's not happening. It's here. So we have to work that out. There was a really good example in the reading, some of the reading that I was sort of doing in preparation for this. And they said we need to help people understand when they ask a question to really engage with the answer. If you put into AI, how do you keep cheese on a pizza? It will come up with a really, really good, clear answer with glue. Nothing wrong with that until you start to critically engage with it. And so we need to work out how we can help our student body, able-bodied, disabled, neurodivergent, whatever, to engage critically with sticking glue on a pizza. Okay, we can get the answers. So what do we? So we have to rethink how we're teaching, how we're researching. You know, there's that difference between authenticity and accuracy. AI hallucinates. How are we going to deal with that? The other big ticket items are privacy and data. Students are acutely aware of it. What happens to all of that data that we're putting in? We need to understand exactly what happens to that data, where it goes. And it's not just the filling in my information when I sign up for something. It's when we access Blackboard, when we access any application, we're giving some information, and we're giving so much information about ourselves in everything that we do. So what happens to that? We need to engage positively with equity and access. We need to really think about bias and fairness. AI is really about the information that's gone in. We've all heard the garbage in, garbage out. But are we enlarging inequities? Are we re-engaging with them? Now, I'm just going to finish off with a concept that I really, really, I think it's my goal now is to get this into normal conversation. And every time I now research it, it comes back and it gives me a reference to me, so I am self-referencing here. But it's the concept of ethical debt. Back in the day of Silicon Valley, the halcyon days of the early days of Silicon Valley, it was move fast and break things. They would make something, they would throw it out to all of us, and we were all guinea pigs, and then, there'd be a glitch and there'd be this and there'd be that, and there was always a patch, there was always a something. But that was okay. That was the so-called technical debt. It was easy to pay it back because you could just put out the patch and people would immediately put it in. When you push AI out too fast, people will lose their rights. People will suffer. Trust will be broken. And ethical debt will be incurred. But you can't get that back so quickly. A few years ago in the UK, they wheeled out care.data. And they just suddenly told everybody that any time that you go to the GP, your data is going to be shared with a commercial research company. Why? Because they're going to, they can do some amazing research and really forward health. Great idea. Bad execution of that idea because they forgot to tell the public this until it was a fait accompli. So the entire public pushed back against it. And to this day, in the UK, it is incredibly hard to get any health data to be accessible for research because the population pushed back. That's the ethical debt. This happened in 2020. They kept trying to change it during COVID times as well, 21, 22, and they just have never been able to get past that. So the ethical debt was incurred because they moved fast, they broke something, and once trust is gone, you don't get it back. So we really need that thoughtful design. So I'm circling right back to pretty much where you finished. Sorry, I did go over.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bernadette, Paul, Charlotte, Brooke. Before we get into questions, I think, Brooke, you said you wanted to respond to one of the thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I didn't add in my presentation, I've got a million thoughts buzzing in my head from all of you, but one thing I just wanted to add to the conversation just as a point to consider, I find that conversations around AI and disability are always around what the people with disabilities we have to do, and it's never about how AI can, for example, facilitate things like prompting people to consider accommodations, prompting people to consider their communication. It's always like, oh, Brooke, you're autistic, put your email through the thing to change your tone. It's never the other person's email AI does a little pop-up box and go, remember, don't take everything so personal. People communicate differently. She's just trying to use her words. But it is, I do feel that the conversation's very one-sided like that. Because even again, those people who are making the AIs who are typically not always with disabilities, I know that's why a lot of people like Focus Bear because it was made by neurodivergent people, but a lot of them aren't disabled and then they're, they're making it for people with disabilities instead of maybe what could help them to be more inclusive. And I just wanted to put that out in the universe. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll open to the floor now for questions from the audience. For those joining in the library today, please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. There is a microphone that will be coming around. And if you are online, please add your question. I will start with the online question first. Yes. And it is about ethical debt. So is the ethical debt incurred about the loss of credibility or something more intrinsic like dignity or social damage?
All of the above, really. The concept of ethical debt is that intangible harm that's being done. Like with care.data, it was a social trust. And a lot of the research afterwards amongst the community is that a lot of people said, I get it. You need at this point in our social development and with AI, if you can access all of these pieces of data, it's an amazing insight and we can do a lot of social good. However, why didn't you ask me? And what are you trying to hide? And so now there is this, there's this lack of, the Brits have a long history of a lack of trust in government. So this was just one of the many other sorts of situations. But it's like this, if you won't ask us, what are you trying to hide? And so then there's that suspicion. So it's just the intangible harms. And the breach of trust was the immediate harm. But now there's that ongoing potential more tangible harm that some of the health advances won't occur. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's not a single thing. Something has been lost that's going to take a very long time to come back, and you can't just fix it with a patch.
Thank you.
And there's tangible harm. I mean, look at robo-debt, for example. People died because of an AI technical screw-up.
Yeah.
Well, and policy as well.
So I think we'll open up to the floor. Any questions from the audience?
Jason.
Unofficial.
I was thinking.
Can I just add to Paul's example of robo-debt? NDIS bill passed last night, and people will die. We're looking into the future, and tens of thousands of people are going to die because of AI decisions.
Yep.
Yeah,
Seconded.
and suicide and divorces, and kids will not get educated. We're not talking like a small thing.
Well, and we're going to be making all this AI and things, but how are we going to fund it? How are we going to afford it? The thing too is it's like these programs, I think the Snoop Dogg one is like $20 a month, but it's like, that's not a big cost to an organization or even something like the NDIS, but for a student who's really trying to get by, that's not going to work out. And second what you say.
And how many tools the students need to get through university.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a question over here.
So you've talked a bit about co-design and having people involved in the conversation. I'm very conscious of the fact that people with disabilities are constantly asked to give of their time and to be part of surveys and things like that. And I guess I just wanted to ask the panel your thoughts on how we move forward in a way where co-design is sort of the standard or the normal, but we're not sort of over-relying on people's time that they may not have to provide to us in giving us those to ensure that happens, if that makes sense. So I'm just very conscious of that as somebody who has asked people for their time and effort.
I think Bernadette made a really good point before where a lot of people call it co-design, but it's consultation. They're just kind of like, hey, we asked these 8 disabled people for their time to volunteer for the greater good or something like that. And that's not co-design. I really think, first of all, we should be paying people, but not just to turn up to a focus group or something. They should actually be members of your team. We should be buying people out. For example, if someone's a part-time staff member here at UQ and you want them on your AI Digital Inclusive project, you should be buying out some work time or paying for extra work time and things. They should actually be on the team, not just people who rock up, if that makes sense. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of these again, these groups of people who've got no lived experience of disability who are just like, yeah, we're gonna get Brooke to come for a focus group and a $20 Coles voucher, and that's gonna make it a co-design project.
Yeah, I actually gave some advice to the Queenslanders with Disability Network Emerging Leaders last night. I gave a speech, and then in part of it, that was one of the things they were asking and we were working with. And some of the advice is, you ask the people who's on the team. So if you're getting asked who's on the team, the research team, and if they're all able-bodied people, why haven't you got anyone with a disability? And if they go, oh, it's because we can't find anyone, you're like, okay, well, 20% of the population, you're obviously not doing very good at research. There's no point participating in your program. Like it's just, and if you're paying, like I went down to Sydney it was $500 all expenses, $500. When I was a junior lawyer, it would have been $3 or $4 grand. It's just. How if I'm an expert I'm not, you've got to pay for that. And that's, a lot of people just go, oh, can you just participate? And the student union here at the University of Queensland, because we were doing this survey, and I said, just out of interest, how many surveys and times do you get asked to share with the students here? And it was like 3 or 4 times a week they get asked to send something out. And I got asked all the time, and it's a huge, even just hitting delete takes time, which is often what I'm doing, because it's like, if you're a commercial operator, who are you? So the answer to that question, I think we've got to go from, for me, I don't want to see people with disabilities consulted or even co-design. I want to see pathways that they go from being the ones being asked on what's needed to do the research, to the people doing the research, to the people leading the research, and probably even the people owning that the product at the end. So for me, we need to start thinking beyond just getting people to help you, because there's a lot of ask on time.
You gonna add to that, Charlotte?
Yeah, that's all right. So I agree with both Brooke and Paul's points. So I think they've kind of answered your question. But one aspect I think I find really problematic is, I think we do a lot of consulting, and I agree with you, sometimes that can appear possibly too much or doesn't. My concern is the meaningful translation of that consultation. There is so much literature out there on the barriers that students with disabilities face, but a lot of other student groups at UQ face, is translating that into meaningful change in our practice and giving the staff the capability and the time and the resources to make that change, I think is really quite a systemic problem that we need to address. So giving academics time to consult would be one really, really useful thing, but giving them time to actually implement the change, I think is also really important. And I think we often focus on the consult bit, but we don't get the landing right. And I think going back to the trust relationship that then gets broken, because then students are like, well, why should I bother coming and contributing my time if you don't actually produce any change based on it?
And they say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to work on actioning the things that we know are problems and have been barriers for a really long period of time. And once we have shown that we have the ability to translate those things and actually make change, I think we'll garner that trust that people will want to come and consult because they know that their words will have impact. But that's obviously a very long-term thing. But I think actually the other problem is we actually need to listen to what is being said more, and that actually helps build the trust to make people want to engage. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we have another question.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, all the speakers. It's been fantastic. I am piggybacking off that topic as well. I think obviously resourcing, I agree, is such a huge issue, and also would love to see more representation, within teams and being hired in permanent roles. I guess my question is, what is an acceptable amount? So if we have teams who are doing co-design and we say, this is incredible, we have somebody who is blind with lived experience that we're able to co-design with, that one voice is surely not enough. Yeah. So what does that look like?
I have an article in the editing process for Times Higher Education about exactly that right now. But I was like, because again, it's how do you pick a good representative? And again, it's one of those things, you're correct. It's like just, you might have someone who's neurodivergent who doesn't believe in neurodivergence as a disability, and that's fine, but how do they then represent views of people who are have a different mindset about it? How do they talk to that community? How do they represent it? So it is a big issue in that sense. And I would say it's not based on numbers, but it's based on the quality of who you choose. So in the article, I've actually got sample interview questions to try and tease out those things like, is there anything in the community that you find that you don't agree with, and why? Or why do you think people think that? How do you actually go about finding views that are not your own? And the answers can literally be, I'm on the UQ Union Disability Collective Discord, things like that. I'm looking for traits for people who don't exist as a disability island, but they exist as part of a community. And that can be an online community, that can be engaging with online scholarship. YouTube essays provide a lot of insight. There's so many different ways we can do it, but you want to look for a person who has those traits and is able to connect and bring those experiences in. So I'd say in how you're actually selecting and filtering your people. I can share the article when it's out because I've got like the dot pointy type things. But does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm keen to read that
Yes.
one.
For people with disabilities, a really key thing is disability representative organisations. Like that's a formal structure within the CRPD. They talk about it in Article 4.3 and 33.3. So it's like that's a really powerful body because, like Bernadette said, Paul Harper isn't necessarily a representative blind person. I mean, I have a very different world, but even now, I mean, I'm a professor and I do okay. I've got, I'm not, most blind people don't have jobs, like a huge percentage, a lot live below the poverty line. I'm not like that. So, and just randomly grabbing a student union rep or even a blind academic or, disability person organisations, they regularly consult on, not like we consult, but they consult on like permanently. They're always working with the community. So they're really useful. And you know who they are because they're led by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities, and they're not service providers.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Do we have any takers? Otherwise, I have a final question. So maybe really quickly we can go down the panel. Looking ahead, what is one change you would most like to see from governments, universities, or technology companies, the tech bros, to ensure AI delivers more inclusive and accessible outcomes for people with disability?
Can I go last because I've taken up a bit of space already?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Paul, do you want to go first?
No. Okay, well, one thing is, bloody hell, there's so many governance shifts. There's so many changes in AI. We've got if you're looking at like, I was on the higher education standards panel and we released a change which would impact the threshold standards. In the summary on that, you have there's a review coming out in the UK, that's in England, Scotland, one in Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and South Korea. Then they've got texted guidance, and each university's got its guidance. And there's so much. And ultimately, we're coming down to how do you do an assessment item, and then you've got to add more time. It's all taking up so much time, and no one's got the time to do anything properly. So we're all using AI, so many people are winging it. And I'm really worried that if we don't actually try and slow down on something without losing in the race, something's really bad going to happen. And we'll end up losing what we actually value.
I'm going to invite us all to go back to Sesame Street. All right? And when they're talking about how to cross the road, they say, sing it in your head. I'm not going to sing it out loud. And when you come to the road, stop, look to the left and look to the right. And then if the road is clear of traffic, walk straight across the road. Don't run.
Actually, you didn't watch that particular.
Oh, there's a little walk straight across the road.
Never too
Don't
late.
run. Yeah, so walk straight across the road. Don't run.
Thank you.
I'll go listen to that in the voice of Snoop Dogg tonight. It's a really tricky question. What can governments, universities, and institutes do to better support AI? I actually think possibly slow down because I think some of the implementations, which is I realise crossing the road, I think some of the drive, particularly around secure assessment and things like that, which is important, and it was kind of in response to the introduction of AI, but the impact of that on students needing more student access plans and exam adjustments and the impact on that team, the resourcing didn't change. So I think what we need to think about is when we bring in those policy changes, having the government think about, okay, what's the flow-on effect and how can we support to make sure that inclusive needs are actually thought of as part of any kind of that kind of process. So I'd like more follow through on the implementation of changes around AI. Yeah.
Very similar to what you've been saying. I'm like, do we have to have AI for everything? Like, just take choosing my words, darned module. Like, I don't know, sometimes can we just, if you're a manager or whatever, can you just like literally watch a 20-minute video on how not to be like a jerk to your to your employees? and then do it. Like, I think sometimes they're like, AI's got to fix everything and this and this and this. And it's like, well, maybe you just need to learn how to teach. Maybe you just need to learn how to do your job from the basic level. Because we were mentioning before is that even if we're using AI, we still need to know how good the product of AI is. And I think it's Gordon Ramsay on the show. He was like, the manager and the owner of the restaurant needs to know how to make the best meatballs because he needs to make sure that his cooks are making the best meatballs. And I think that's the same thing around like the AI. It's like, it doesn't matter if you put in this, and this. If you don't know what a good outcome looks like, if you don't know what is actually helpful, and you haven't taken the steps to earn that knowledge, it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't connect with the community, and it doesn't help. And again, the answer is not always AI. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So that concludes
the Learning How to Teach paper that just got released by Jason Clow yesterday.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yes.
Yes. We'll
Haven't
check
seen
that out. But thank you so much. This concludes our panel discussion. On behalf of UQ Library, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to our presenters. So if we can, round of applause. Thank you for your time, your insights, and your generous contributions. I also wanted to just reiterate that today's event was in support of the Digital Inclusive Design Project team. They do have a tool piloting Read and Write, an inclusive learning and productivity tool available to all UQ staff and students until December. If you have an opportunity to check it out, they would appreciate that. This is where we'll leave our online audience. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you to future UQ events.
Thank you.